Thank you. Welcome to our viewers online and from wherever you are joining us throughout the world. Welcome to our special session on metropolitan governance, of which is our session 4. And it is mainly focusing on key issues that are related to metropolitan governance. And as we understand that in the African context, it is estimated that by 2050, more than 66% of the African population will be living in urban areas, of which then also suggests that it is quite important for metropolitan municipalities to be able to cater for the needs of these inhabitants that will be living in big cities. And this seminar also, or this conference also deals with particular issues that are related to core issues that are facing the governance of metropolitan municipalities, not only in South Africa, but throughout the world. And as we understand in the South African context, again, that issues related to the lack of sustainability in coalition municipalities, such as in your Johannesburg, your Tshwane, and as well as the Nelson Mandela Bay, as we observed between 2016 and 2021, were some of the core issues that were facing our municipalities. And then if you look at the other lower tiers, again, issues of service delivery and how many municipalities in South Africa are dysfunctional, also related to some of the key issues that our panel will be unpacking, particularly focusing on how metropolitan governance has been undertaken in their respective countries and some of the lessons that we can learn in South Africa. And our two speakers today are Professor Taibat Lawanson from the University of Lagos, and as well as Professor Omano Edigheji as well from Nigeria. Just to go through the brief bio for Professor Taibat Lawanson, who will be our first presenter. Is a professor of urban management and governance at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, where she also leads the Pro-Poor Development Research Cluster and serves as a co-director at the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development. She is also interested on how formal and informal systems can synthesize in the emerging African city, and her research also focuses on the interface between social complexities, urban realities, and the quest for special justice. And she is also a UN policy expert on urban governance capacity and institutional development, and is very well known for her work focusing on intersectoral work that engages students, local communities, and as well as policy and civil society in building better metropolitan areas. And her research is going to be focusing, in terms of presentation, is going to be focusing on the Nigerian state in providing public services and the self-provision of services by communities in some of the areas in Lagos, and as well as how urban governance in Lagos manages the relationship between formal and informal institutions of metropolitan management, and challenges and some of the opportunities that are emerging for innovations in that particular process. So I will give the space to our first speaker, Professor Lawson. Please go ahead.
Greetings, everyone. Can you see my slides, please?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you on metropolitan governance. And in this case, I'll be speaking from the context of Lagos. I think one of the largest metropolitan areas in Africa, and a city of over 20 million people that continually seeks to reinvent herself. So I'll be Lagos is essentially a city of boundaries. Government of China challenged by issues around first defining even the boundaries of the city, determining where are the city boundaries, what is the population of the city, and then I will be looking a bit at some of the issues around the dynamics of governance in the city, the conflicting rationalities of development, issues around formal and informal contestations, and also some of the emergent challenges with the scales of governance, given the complexity of the city. And finally, I'll be sharing a few thoughts about the dynamism of Lagos and how communities are able to push and explore alternative urbanisms that seek to share the work of governance with the constituted political actors. Now, the first issue is, what exactly is Lagos? Lagos started from the 1840s as a shipping and trading hub, and then it became the capital of the region during the colonial times, and then it went on to become the capital of Nigeria. And by the time Nigeria gained independence, it continued to be the capital for the next 32 years until 1992, when the federal capital was shifted to Abuja. Up until today, Lagos remains the economic hub of the country, with more than 50% of the GDP being generated from the city. And so Lagos, from its very origin, can be considered to be a local community. As it is today, we still have a place called Eko, where the indigenes come from. It can be called a local government. We have the Lagos Island local government. It can be a metropolis, which has 16 local governments. It's considered a state of 20 local governments. It's also considered to be a mega city when you look at the spread of the state that has gone beyond the jurisdiction of the boundaries up until taking up about 4 local governments in the adjoining Ogun State. And it is also considered to be a region, the greater Ibadan, Lagos, Accra region along the west coast of Africa. And so the city is it's usually a bit confused as to its status, and that has a lot of impact on the nature of governance. In what capacity does the state government or the local governments, the city governments, and the communities, what exactly is the status of the city given the multiple identities the city has? And then we have the population dynamics. As at 2006, when the national population census was done in Nigeria, the Lagos state it was said that Lagos state had a population of 9 million. At that time, the Lagos state government that carried out a concurrent census enumeration came up with a total figure of close to 15 million. And so there have been these contestations around how many people exactly are there in Lagos. The Lagos state government as at 2015 estimated 24 million. The World Population Review, of which most in the international development indices estimates about 17.5 million as at 2020, estimates 20 million. So we have these challenges of determining how many we are. And the challenge is even more because a lot of these figures for Lagos are generic figures. They do not really tell us the actual segregated data. They don't tell us how many men, how many women. They don't tell us how many young people. They don't tell us how many people with disabilities. If you don't have this kind of basic segregated data, it makes planning very difficult. For example, if we don't know how many school-age children, how then can we provide or can we propose the development of schools in 10 years and the number of jobs that should be generated in particular areas in 15 years, take for example. So that is a critical problem that we have in Lagos, and I dare say in many cities where data collection is still difficult or not going on as often or as real time in a segregated contextual way as it ought to be. In Lagos, there is also these conflicting rationalities of development where we find that there are challenges between what the government envisions as the future of the city and what the people's everyday needs and challenges and realities determine to be the future of the city. And so we perpetually have these contestations between the formal and informal systems of service provisioning, between the global versus local identities, particularly because our government wants to be, or the government has a vision to be Africa's model megacity and seeks to have a lot of these international indicators of livability, which sometimes do not really align to the local needs. For example, the Smart City Index considers the number of Apple stores in a city to be an important indicator. And then given the GDP of the average Lagosian, very many of us cannot afford iPhones. We make do with the Chinese phones. And so even though we have a high internet reach, we are not really considered smart because we are not using the appropriate devices. We also have the conflicting rationalities between governance and survival, whereby many of the members of the city, of the residents of the city, continue to reinvent the city, appropriating local practices that many times are at variance with urban planning or other city governance laws. And so you see people in a perpetual contestation with their city governments. We have the kick against indiscipline, the transport core, the environmental sanitation core that tries to keep people, in line by enforcing laws against street trading, laws against public urination and things like that, whereas the infrastructure is not in place to ensure that all those who want to trade can have stalls in the market or enough public toilets in public places. So we have that continuous tension between, the lives and everyday realities of people and the ambitions and aspirations for greatness that our government wants us to get to. And that essentially is a challenge across many African cities. And so we find that the issues around urban transformation mean very different things. Like I said, to the Lagos state government, it's to have these world-class status. And for everyday people, it's basically to have access to opportunities for better life. And to the urban poor, it is simply survival. And when we talk about the formal and informal contestations, it is essentially a power game. Who wields power in this city? Apart from the political institutions, we have quite a number of influential blocs that wield power. Regarding access to land, use of land, we find that traditional institutions, the customary landowners, wield a lot of power, and in collaboration with the government, it has some of the unintended consequences include forced eviction, gentrification, and increasing rental rates. The governance of the public space is also contested, where you find out that the road transport unions wield a lot of power, and with the backing of the government or the political institutions, they are able to entrench rulership over the streets. And what we find is architecture of fear, where people are afraid to go out or go to certain spaces, and then the increase in urban violence, particularly when different road unions are contesting for power. Finally, we have the issues around economic activities as it relates to the informal sector, particularly where the market unions, also in collaboration with the political elite, are able to wield enormous power over who sells what, who does what, and where. And that has resulted in market demolitions, market fires, and the proliferation of street trading. Incidentally, street trading is prohibited in Lagos, and so we find out that a lot of people are carrying out their activities, their economic activities for survival by flouting the law. In all these situations, as it is in many situations across our city, increasing socioeconomic inequalities as a result of elite capture of different sectors is something that people have to deal with on a daily basis. And then when we come to the actual dynamics of governance, Lagos we have 20 local governments constitutionally, and this proved to be quite centralized, and people were unable to really engage with their local government systems. And so in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, 37 local council development areas were established. And so we have 57 local government and local council development areas around this in the city. The Nigerian constitution establishes the local government as an autonomous level of government with independent budgetary and statutory responsibilities. However, the Lagos State government, through the Lagos State Local Government Administration Law of 2003, outlined the local government as a subject under the Lagos State Ministry of Local Government and Community Affairs, whereby all the local governments in Lagos State are subject to the laws and instructions of the Lagos State House of Assembly and are really departments under the Ministry of Local Government, essentially robbing them of their autonomy and paralyzing the local level of governance with attendance, resource, and technical incapacitation. What this means in real terms is that the implementation of the new urban agenda, which is centered around municipalities, is really suffering in the Nigerian context, at least in the context of Lagos. And we find that at the grassroots level, there is a lot of dependence on political patronage and the state government's benevolent interventions. People are now unable to, demand on the local government system, and the local government also has kind of, abdicated its responsibilities to the big brother, the state government. This has led to the rise of community-led development efforts, and I will term these alternatives of urbanism, in which Lagos residents have to, use other means in order to access infrastructure, particularly infrastructure that ought to be provided by the local government system. Alternative urbanism is a focus on counter-hegemonic forms of urban living and practices that are alternative to the mainstream models. It also looks at urban space, the reconfiguration of urban space in response to imperative to restructure and reconsider social, economic, and technological infrastructure. And it raises a concern to broaden the scope of intellectual reference points through which urban practices can be conceptualized, investigated, and implemented. In the case of Lagos, the main local actors implementing alternative urbanisms are the residents' associations, which are mostly found in the middle and high-income areas, the community development associations, which are found in the low-income areas and in the informal settlements, social networks, which come about around social needs, such as the Federation of the Urban Poor, the Federation of Informal Workers, as well as the very strong social network of protesters, particularly those we find online, as well as the traditional leadership, and in many cases also the religious groups. I will speak about how communities have been able to leverage on this to create alternative urbanism using a few case studies. First is environmental sanitation in Iwaya. Iwaya is a local community, informal community, and a slum community. And in 2006, there was a case of forced eviction in the neighboring community, Makoko, which is one of the largest slums in Lagos. And one of the reasons for that demolition was hygiene and environmental sanitation reasons. And so this community took it upon themselves to develop a strategy for environmental sanitation. And what did they do? The local chief appointed, the local community leader appointed a chief on every street, and the chief is responsible for coordinating environmental sanitation activities on the last Saturday of every month and on Thursdays of every week. And so every week, the inspectors from the palace go around and determine which community has been able to keep their street clean per time. And what we find in that community is that there have been reduced levels of sanitation-related illnesses and increased flood resilience. During the COVID pandemic, especially at the beginning when there was a lockdown in Nigeria, we found that in many communities, particularly where people were unable to access the government palliatives, which were largely the undocumented populations found in the local communities, people activated, people as infrastructure, a term that was coined by Abdulmalik Simoni, in which people were able to build support systems for neighbors, for colleagues, as the case may be. And were able to have lots of community groups identifying more indigent members of their community, giving them food, ensuring that the communities were made secure, and that crowdfunding through social media was done in order to support the other groups that were providing services to local communities. Another issue is with regards to water. Water is something that is quite challenging for us. Even though we have a public water service, less than 20% of the population is able to access public water. So what do people do? First, we look at what the government does. The government has been able to provide waterworks, mini waterworks in some areas, and then through different projects such as this World Bank Lagos Metropolitan Development and Governance Project provide boreholes in communities. What we find is that, oftentimes these kinds of interventions don't last long, primarily because they don't carry the people along, or those are not the immediate challenges of the community. And so in this community, after 12 boreholes were instituted, only 3 were found running 7 years later, primarily because they were not appropriately placed. On the converse, in Iwaya, the same community I was talking about earlier, they were able to appropriate an uncompleted government water facility to proper use, whereby a federal government donation of a constituency water project that was abandoned was brought back to life through mobilization of funds and people power. And that public water service has continued to run, first by requesting a local politician to donate a tanker as well as a solar panel for energizing the borehole. And then finally, the community took independent oversight over that water body. During the lockdown also, the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development supported Ajegunle Ikorodu community, another low-income community, in developing a resilience action plan with the collaboration of the state's resilience office as well as an NGO. And what we found was that people were able to identify the issues that they wanted, the issues that were germane, the most pressing issues in their community across water, education, infrastructure, security, and health sectors. And because of the nature of partnerships that was appropriated in the development of that resilience action plan, in the course of 12 months since the plan was launched, they were able to achieve, out of 15 initiatives that were developed, they were able to achieve 8 of them in the space of 12 months. This was a community that up until that time had not gotten any government intervention for over 10 years. So what was the main thing? It was the focus on partnerships. What was the main thing? It was the focus on community mobilization and ensuring that there was policy uptake. The community, first of all, was involved in determining what the issues are, in determining what the solutions are, and in committing to ensuring that there was an implementation and sustainability. And so therefore, in closing, I would just like to highlight 3 things that are important if we are to get metropolitan governance right. I've spoken about a few micro-scale interventions of community-led approaches. But the important thing is that if we're going to get local governance right, it must be through partnerships. It must be doing with the people rather than for the people. It must be looking at how people are working and improving the resilience of their neighborhood and leveraging on those approaches, providing support and regulations, and then helping to scale it up or to amplify it across local communities. And finally, ensuring that community mobilization of resources and local action through people as infrastructure is embedded into our local governance processes. I stop here for now, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
For such a thought-provoking presentation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our next speaker so that while I'm also gathering the questions, so that you can also reflect on them. But there are some questions that I've also noted on our Microsoft Teams, and we're also collecting additional questions for you. And our next speaker is Dr. Omano Edigheji, who is currently a special advisor in the research and documentation to the governor of Kaduna State in Nigeria. He is also the co-founder of the Center for Africa's Social Progress and the research director of the Policy and Capacity Enhancement at the Human Sciences Research Council. His work is in the political economy of development, and he's also the co-author of Governance in the New South Africa, The Challenges of Globalization. And in terms of his presentation, he's going to be focusing on issues of governance challenges in Kaduna State in Nigeria, where he also serves as the advisor to the governor. Dr. Edigheji, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleague, Professor Lawanson, and all the participants. Let me also indicate that I'm also currently a visiting associate professor at the University of Johannesburg. So what my reflection is going to be inside in and outside, inside in and outside in. One, as an academic, and two, being a special advisor to the governor and serve in the cabinet. So I will bring some practical things that we are doing in Kaduna State. But I think the first point of reflection, the issues that my colleague has captured somewhat reflect the general Nigerian trend. So what I will try to do is to try to amplify some of those, and then try to tease out some innovation that we are undertaking in Kaduna State. I think Kaduna State is the third also largest state in Nigeria, and among the largest cities in the country, two are in Kaduna State, Kaduna City and Zaria. They are among in terms of population, they are among the largest. The Nigeria, or like South Africa, is a federation where you have the federal government, the state government, and local government. But then you have, there's a constitutional provision that define the roles and responsibility of each of these levels of government. In South Africa, we call them spheres of government. The exclusive list, I think it's about 66. There are about 66 items. Then you have the concurrent list, which is what both the state and the federal government can work on together. education, health, etc. are among those. Then you have the local government. The Constitution provides, as I indicated, what each of these levels of government should do. But at the same time, because we have gone through military regime, the role of local government seems to have evolved over time. At times watered down, which is one of the problems that we seem to have. I think it was in 1981. There's an act of the National Assembly that provided for the state local government joint account, and I'm raising this point. It's something that we need to reflect on. That account made it possible for states to basically hijack the resources and responsibilities of local government. It is a major problem today. It is some governors use that account as their pocket money. So instead of the money going to the local government for them to deliver services to citizens, it is controlled by the state governors. As we speak, there are very few states that have now said, look, we are not going to do that. The governor that has served in Kaduna State, when he came into office in 2015, one of the policy decisions he took was to ensure the physical autonomy of local government. The money that is allocated from the federation account goes directly to the local government for them to be able to carry out their responsibility to citizens. Most states have not ensured that local government have, physical autonomy. So that is one point that I think I want to flag. The second point that I want to flag is that the Constitution is such a way that has, also the law is such a way that have made it possible for local government to be an appendage, or local governments to be appendages of the state. As a consequence, governors of state appoint administrators to run various local government. That happens across the country. That is the case in most states. Yes, when Governor Rufai assumed power in Kaduna State, we felt that if we are talking of democracy, citizens need to be able to elect their leaders at all levels of government. In South Africa, we use the word phase of government. Local government, state government, and the federal government. As a consequence, the state electoral body conducted election, and it is, and I think we are the only subnational government on the African continent that conduct election using electronic voting machine and using electronic system to transmit the result. So it minimizes the level of rigging that have characterized most of African states. I think we did that in 2016, 17, and just last year we also have just conducted the second election using that electronic voting system. So in that respect, Kaduna seems to be ahead compared to other states. So just to point, let me just underline this. First, we ensure fiscal autonomy of the state. Two, Kaduna State also ensure that local government, citizens in local government elect their own leaders. Then we recognize that if you take Kaduna City, it is made up of 4 local governments. Zaria is almost the same, and Kapashan is almost the same. We recognize that if you leave it to local government to undertake development in their respective local government, you are not going to have integrated development. And at the same time, they also do not have enough resources to be able to do that. So last year, the executive arm, where I serve, we sent a law to the State House of Assembly to create 3 municipal councils. Kaduna Municipal Council, Kaduna Capital Municipal Council, Zaria Municipal Council, and Kapashan. The Kaduna Capital Municipal Council is made up of 4 local government. I just want to focus on that. And what the aim is that local government in those states, in that municipality, will contribute a share of their revenue to a central purse, which is administered by a commissioner appointed by the governor, who is also the administrator. Then the state government will also contribute a share into that purse to ensure rapid integrated development of Kaduna City, Zaria, as well as Kafanchan. So that is the innovation that before now, most local government in Nigeria, including Kaduna State, spend their revenue on recurrent expenditure. Because of the reforms that have been initiated in Kaduna State, we are now seeing local government and now also the municipal authorities having expenditure on capital. Their capital expenditure have increased, and you can see the projects that they are undertaking. Because prior to this period, and this is across Nigeria, where local government mainly spent their revenue on recurrent expenditure, there became what I call an ungoverned space in terms of service delivery and even in security. So every middle class in Nigeria And every rich person in Nigeria is a local government on his or her own. You provide your water. At times, citizens also provide their roads in their neighborhood. Then you also provide your electricity. As a consequence, the pollution level in Nigeria is very high, emanating from generators, and some of these generators, most use diesel. I'm sad to say that South Africa, Nigeria was at a point looking to South Africa, but it seems South Africa is looking to Nigeria and have learned the wrong lessons of not being able to provide electricity to its citizens. So every second we hear about load shedding, and what is happening? Citizens are now buying generators, having inverters in their home. That's a crisis of not only municipal governance, but governance in general. But how did we get there? We have to pose that question. In doing that, we have to think of what I refer to as the macro conditioning, which is we have to look at it broadly. And if we do that, the crisis of inability of municipality, of states, or the central government, or the federal government in South Africa, or the federal government in Nigeria, to be able to, the electricity crisis that we have, is a product of an elite, of an unpatriotic elite that do not prioritize the needs of citizens. So state capture is a product of that. How do we then resolve it? Because I do not just want to tease out what are the problems. How do we resolve the crisis of electricity or state capture? And how do we then ensure better governance at the municipal level? Then to do that, I want to draw on comparative lessons. If you take China as an example, before you get to certain positions, you must have gone through the political school of the Communist Party. Then there is the Chinese, Academy of Governance. Then there's another one in Shanghai. I'm forgetting the name. So you rise. So the recruitment process is key, and how you rise in the system is key. In the Africa context, including South Africa, that is not the case. The political school of the ANC has basically collapsed. In Nigeria, we do not have, there is no political party that have a political school. Similarly, we have the National School of Government here in South Africa, and I think there's a public service institute in Nigeria. If you compare the content of the courses taken, say, in the Razak School of Government in Malaysia, or there's another school, as well as those in China, there is no basis of comparison. So I think one of the things that I want to flag is the recruitment method. How do we recruit competent people to serve at municipality? That will be key. The context in South Africa there's this saying that some branches of the ANC are owned by individuals. You can also say the same thing in Nigeria. The political parties in every state, I will argue that there is no cohesive one political party in Nigeria. The PDP, which is the main opposition party at the moment, at each state, the party is owned by the governor. The same apply to APC. So it's like a franchise. There is no center that truly say, basically, this is what brings us together. This is what we share together. This is how we are going to take the country forward. So to address the crisis of municipal governance, we will have to think about how we recruit how do we have political organization, not in name, but in the real sense of the word, that they have an agenda that they want to pursue, not as a vehicle to capture political power, which is the case we have in Nigeria at the moment, and we are seeing a semblance of that in South Africa. And I think one can generalize to a larger extent, on the African continent. So the crisis of local governance, there are two things that need to, and I'm going to conclude on this. There are two things that we need to address. First, the ideological orientation of the political elite. And for an elite, there is a need for an elite consensus. What kind of society do we want? And what will be the minimum that the elite will not accept? Beyond a certain limit, they will say, that is the red flag. So I argue in my most recent book, I argue for what I call an ideology of development nationalism. If the ruling elite in South Africa had been patriotic, the Gupta phenomenon would not have happened. If the Nigerian political elite had been patriotic, they would not see Nigeria as a cemetery, which they do at the moment because they get sick, they go outside the country, they die outside the country, and they are brought back to Nigeria to be buried. So first, the ideological orientation and the need for an elite consensus. The second will be the institutional underpinning. We need to have an institutional underpinning that will be development oriented. Both in South Africa and Nigeria, one of the things that is missing is an absence of a Weberian bureaucracy, which my colleague, Professor Ivor, he has done a lot of work, on that. How do we recruit people in the civil service? How do we promote people in the civil service? What is their career path? The civil service at both municipal level as well as state and local government, and in South Africa I would say, federal level, and in South Africa I would say municipality, provincial, and the national government. How do we recruit people? We need to bring merit. People recruited purely based on merit. Everybody to enter the public service, the entry level must enter the public service through through the entrance examination that is open and it is competitive. In Brazil, to be that exam, for people to prepare for it, it takes that's minimum 6 months. In China, it is about 9 months. In South Africa, people just enter the civil service. In Nigeria, it's basically through who you know. So municipal governance needs to be anchored on a Weberian bureaucracy. It is only when we do that that they will be able to deliver services to citizens. And lastly, the capacity of local government, particularly in Nigeria, and municipality in Kaduna, we are trying to change that, to be able to forge strong relationship with the private sector and drive investment will be key. Because if we only focus on the social sector without thinking about how are they going to get the revenue to be able to deliver services to citizens, if we only focus, if we don't address that question, then that would be a bit problematic. I think I will end on that note and I will take a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Edigheji, for the presentation as well. It was also thought-provoking. So, as we continue, what I will do is to ensure that each panel get a set of questions directed to them and on. But in doing so, I'd also like to recap on what both mainly focused on. This presentation by Lawanson focused on massive urbanization and metropolitan government dynamics. And some of the key issues that were also outlined were the issues of a city without boundaries, with a particular focus on the population in the city of Lagos being 20 million, of which also correlates with the projections that Africa's urbanization is increasing at a rate that is mainly not sustainable. And also, again, the key issues that were also raised. I mean, one point is the issue of planning without reliable data. And if we recall again, that is one particular issue that is mainly throughout the African continent, whereby we do not have reliable statistics. And without reliable statistics, we cannot plan effectively for development, because as you plan, you need updated statistics or a database that will show you the kind of information that you need. And again, if you look at key cities such as Cairo in Egypt, and as well as the entire Egyptian state, right now they're heavily investing in new cities. They're also heavily investing in new industries to ensure that they're well equipped for the future where Africa is taking itself, particularly in terms of industrialization and the high rates of urbanization. And there are also other key issues that were also mentioned in terms of conflicting realities between your formal institutions and your informal institutions. And this is a big part, because even in the South African context, we are slowly seeing that there is an emergence of these informal institutions. And some of them, again, may be causing more harm than they are causing good, particularly if you see as to how the state failure in terms of governing the city has also brought up challenges related to the informal economy, whereby there are issues of xenophobia. Now we are seeing what we call the Dudula movements, because the governments in these particular cities are failing to ensure that their spaces are going to be adhered to in terms of the bylaws. And again, one particular key question that also arises again is the issue of ensuring that within the governance mechanisms or structures that we put in place, how do we ensure then that we are going to create co-production between these formal and informal institutions? Because at the end of the day, co-production is supposed to be at the heart of a new form of governance that ensures that no one is left behind, particularly in terms of the sustainable development goals. And again, one particular question that I will also raise to Professor Lawson is related to, in as much as we focused on the city of Lagos, again, what is the current state in terms of other spheres or other categories of municipalities in Nigeria, are they basically facing similar challenges as we are in South Africa in terms of issues related to institutional capacities, issues such as financial management, or because those are quite key? And again, I would also like you to also consider the questions that I've presented on the chat. And as I move on to Professor Edigheji's presentation, there were key issues that you also mentioned, particularly focusing on now. It is easy for the state to hijack resources that are meant for the local people, particularly through state governance, of which is one of the key issues that we are also facing in South Africa. If we look at some of the reports coming from the Auditor General, we see that most of the time, majority of the resources that are meant for municipalities are diverted for private gains. And it also takes us back to a particular issue that we focused on yesterday on fiscal decentralization, of which is basically the issue that you mentioned in terms of not enough resources for integrated development planning. In the South African context, we have a particular problem whereby in as much as local government only gets roughly 8 or 9% on average of the division of revenue, what we find is that majority of those billions also go back to national treasury because of fiscal incapacity. Our municipalities are not even able to spend what they have been given by the national government. That also on its own shows that in terms of planning again, how do they plan for development? And then at the end of the day, you know that there are places that do not have roads, they are not well equipped. Yet again, there's money that goes back to the national treasury simply because municipalities cannot spend it wisely. And again, there were some recommendations that you made, particularly focusing on China and how they promote what we call a meritocratic recruitment, again, also linked to the European bureaucracy, of which is quite key. And again, if you look at the Zondo report in the South African context recently, it's also alluded to particular issues related to cadre deployment, of which was also argued to be unconstitutional. Right. And if you go to countries such as China, we understand that cadre deployment is at the heart of the country's particular development. But the particular key issue that are also narrated and are also believe, as we mentioned, is related to this issue of ideological commitment. I mean, what kind of people do you have in office? Are they committed to a particular developmental cause that the state has or each political party has, or they are there to ensure that they get a chance at those particular resources, of which is also a particular key issue that was raised by former President Thabo Mbeki recently, when you argued that majority of the members that are joining the ANC now are mainly joining it so that they can have access to resources and power. And again, lastly, in terms of some of the recommendations that you made, you mentioned particular issues related to ensuring effective political organizations that are committed to the cause, the issue of and the ideological orientation of the political elite, and also having common ground, and as well as the institutional underpinning of a development-oriented space. And again, if you look at the South African context, the Constitution, by virtue of it, argues that the government needs to be developmental in delivering core services. But these are some of the key issues that we are not seeing in our metropolitan government. And if we again recall in terms of what happened within the first wave of what we call metropolitan coalitions in South Africa, Nelson Mandela Bay, it was not very sustainable. If you go to Johannesburg, it was not sustainable. The city of Tshwane was not sustainable to an extent that it was also placed under administration, of which was later overturned by the Constitutional Court. But these again are related to key issues, and one of the most important things then that we also can unpack is as to how some of these challenges also impact on the ability of these cities or of these metropolitan municipalities to deliver services if they are ineffective or if their coalitions are not going to be or to work in a manner that is going to promote development. So I will start with Professor Lawanson. I hope that you've went through the questions that we have there on this sideline in terms of our messages. So if you want the first question, okay, could you kindly respond to the questions, and possibly what you can do as you are responding, you can also tell us which question you are responding to. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Isaac, and well, quite interesting that the questions in the chat box. The first, I'll start from the bottom, the one about the risk and the plans for Lagos or Nigeria to transit to net zero emission. We have a climate action plan that was launched last year, the second edition, the support of the C40. And so there is a lot that is going on. There's also a resilience strategy that is moving the city towards more climate conscious development. Unfortunately, the gap that we find is that there's a lot on paper and not so much, in terms of operationalizing many of these plans. And that needs to change. Perhaps it's a capacity issue, perhaps it's a funding issue, but we find out that a lot of the civil society action and small SMEs in the space are more active in climate conscious activities and things like that. I believe that is where these partnerships come in. If the partnerships are strong and then they are able to lead, whereas government is able to provide the regulatory background and the support in terms of financing where necessary to ensure we move forward. Because there's a lot of social consciousness that is required for us to switch to understanding that we are in a climate crisis and things have to change. With regards to the risk of flooding, yes, the entire city is low-lying, and so we are at perpetual risk of rising sea level and other anthropogenic consequences of climate change. And so we're building better. There's a lot of infrastructure development going on around the places that are particularly vulnerable. Maybe not as fast as it ought to, but there is some things going on. And then there's a question in the chat room about, is there a possibility to reverse the urbanization trend in light of loss of biodiversity and all? What we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years is an increased migration rate into the city, primarily for young people who are seeking economic livelihood, and unfortunately for those who have been displaced due to some of the insurgency that is going on in northern Nigeria, seeking for safer spaces down south. And so we have this high rate of migration into the city that needs to be contained, but currently not much is being done. Number one, by way of documentation. Number two, by way of providing safety mechanisms for those who are coming in. And so we have that challenge. In terms of operationalizing co-production as a pathway to metropolitan governance, I think it is possible, but it takes a lot of humility on the part of government to recognize that they can go further working with the people. What we find with many of our governments is, and even academics really, is that we often take up a superior position to communities and believe we know what is good for them. And that's where the challenge comes. When these interventions come into the communities and it is not what the community needs, or it's not presented in a way the community can manage. So co-production has to start from recognizing that the people who live in these local communities know better, number one. Number two, the people who live inside these communities are already surviving. And so co-production comes in when you see them as partners and you are able to think through how can we make things better. And I think that's a lesson for a lot of us, especially when dealing with local communities. And then with regards to the levels of governance in Nigeria, Nigeria runs a 3-tier system, federal, state, and local government. And the challenge that government has towards local communities is the same way the federal and state government, often belittle the role of the local government and see the local government system as an appendage, and usually as an appendage that lacks capacity and is invalid. And so you find out that many state governments rush in to perform the activities that are statutorily the responsibility of the local government. And so they don't do it well because they are also burdened by their own constitutional mandates. And so the important thing for me is that the local government needs to be strengthened. The local government system needs to be strengthened. Professor Omano has spoken about leadership recruitment, getting people who understand the problems, who are committed to the solutions. And I think that's one stage. It's also important to train, to ensure that those who are going into these positions are going there equipped with the resources, with the technical capacity, with the plans, with the vision to do better. And I think that cuts across the entire continent. If we have if we have the right crop of people and they are not trained, we're still running around in circles. So there has to be an intentional approach. And what we did towards this at the University of Lagos is to start a master's program in urban management that is specifically targeted at people working in the local government system. If the local government if the municipality is the platform for the implementation of the SDGs, then those who are either the political actors or the civil servants in that level have to be equipped with the right technical capacities to do their work effectively. And I think a lot more of that needs to be done. I know that the University of Wits also runs an urban management program targeted at a similar objective. We need to have more of those kinds of training programs and more opportunities for communities and local government officials to work together. And I think the higher levels, the state and the federal government also need to stretch and not see the local governments merely as smaller, less powerful, less influential parts of government, but see them as equally important for the emancipation of local people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawson, for those comments and particularly responding to the questions that our viewers have posed, and as well as to some of the additional information that you shared with us in terms of how Nigeria has been trying to overcome some of those metro governance challenges. And I will leave it then to Professor Edigheji. There are two questions that are there. The first one is related to organization as a remedy some of the government challenges. And the question is, if there is a remedy, so now how do we ensure that professionalization is implemented in a manner that ensures that with these various political parties that are governing at the local government level do not get to use their power to circumvent the right candidates within these positions? And the second one is also related to the ways of improving the institutional capacity of local government. And the key question is, how do we then correct the structure of the state to ensure that there are even capacities throughout the different tiers of government? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with one of the professionalization of the public service. And in this case, as it relates to municipality or to local government, depending on what you want to call it. There are no two ways about it. And this is a debate I'm also having with the National School of Government here in South Africa. If you want to have a career, professional, capable civil service, everybody must go through open, transparent examination. That is the first point. That is a classical Weberian bureaucracy. And you enter with a first degree. And I take the South Africa, let me take the South Africa one. The time I did my research, I think in 2014. At the time, 82% of public civil servants in China have a 4-year degree and above. In South Africa, at the same time, both the provincial and national government, it was 4.5%. So it tells you the crisis that we have. Then, two, if you want to have a career professional public service at the National School of Government, which is being run by my colleague and a friend, they are trying to forge the issue. You cannot enter the public service, say, as a director. Director or chief director is not the entry level. You must enter through the entry level and you rise through the rank. And to get from one position to the other, I take Malaysia as an example. Your 3-year performance appraiser is taken into consideration. Then you will go to a course and write a promotion examination that is administered by UNTAG. UNTAG is the national school, is basically the National School of Government of Malaysia. The same applies to China. But here in South Africa, we recruit people, and the same applies to Nigeria. We recruit people, they jump in through the middle. If you look at the military, where we can all learn lessons from, you cannot recruit, nobody enter the military, both in South Africa and Nigeria, let's say as a colonel. You have to enter, the military, if it is the officer's cadre, from the entry level of the officer's cadre, and you rise through the rank. So this is an issue that the South African government have been trying to forge. It's part of the empirical evidence. They have been trying to forge this. At the National School of Government, and I'm in debate with them. The principal is my friend and my colleague, and I'm having a debate, a debate with him. So promotion must be based on performance, prior to which there should be some training. That is how you professionalize the public servant. And it should not be based on who you know. In China, people will say, yes, but the Chinese people are conflicting an issue here in South Africa, that the problem in South Africa is deployment of ANC cadre. The problem per se is not deployment. The problem is deploying the wrong people who are unqualified to the position. I take China. The members of the Communist Party is not up to 12% of the total population. Members of the registered members of the Communist Party. But about 90% of Chinese public servants are members of the Communist Party. Members of the Communist Party are part of the elite. They attend some of the best universities in the country and outside the country. So they are able to compete with anybody anywhere, and they will be recruited. So what needs to be done in South Africa is recruit the best. If they are recruit the best, whether they are from the Communist Party or whatever party they are, let them just be the best that will serve South Africans. And the same apply to Nigeria. We have seen a crisis where you have people in government, they don't even understand the policy of the government. So how can they implement it? Then you also have a phenomenon of ghost workers, which is also a drain on the public purse. People recruit their family members, their friends, and what have you, that they don't even go to work. My colleague, Professor Lawanson, knows the number of how many ghost workers have been removed from the payroll at the federal level in Nigeria. In Kaduna State, I think we have removed close to 23,000 ghost workers from the payroll. And recently I was reading an article here in South Africa where we have ghost workers in South Africa. We can accept it in Nigeria because we really do not have an ID, right? In South Africa, we have an ID system. So how do the ghost workers were able to be on parcel? Is it parcel? Persal, which is where all the personnel records are kept. How do they manage to get into parcel? So we need to address. So it's part of the district that need to address. How do we address the capacity of municipality and what have you? Some of the points that I have raised are part of what needs to be done to address the capacity question. But in addition to that, there is a problem we have on the African continent in general. They call it capacity building. I don't understand what it means. If you have some money, they say capacity building. But there is no skill gap analysis that is undertaken. So say, these are the skill gap. Let's say we take ESCOM. What are the skill gaps in ESCOM or in Joburg Metro that needs to be addressed for one or two issues to be faced? It is not just waking up to say you are sending Professor Omano for a training. What skill gap are you addressing? In Kaduna State, we are trying to do that, to say, okay, what are the skills gap? It is not just to send people to Harvard or whatever. What skills are missing that needs to be addressed so that we can fill the gap? So the issue of skill gap analysis is very critical. And this is not just about acquiring PhDs or whatever. Let's say we take doctors. If the shortage are pediatrician, then you train pediatrician. If it is surgeons, you train surgeon. You don't just say, I'm going to train doctors. Identify the gaps you want to address. At the moment, I don't think there's any African country that that can tell us that, no, this is the skill gap that they want to address. On the basis of that, they are sending people to abroad. But also to address that, we have to be forthright with development partners to say, don't just fly from New York or Washington or London to say you want to do capacity building. And some of that money is given to us as loan. Okay? let us do an assessment first let us undertake a skill gap analysis, identify the gaps, what we want to do, where we want to go to as a state, a municipality, or a provincial government, and said, okay, these are the gaps that we want to fill. From this ESCOM crisis, as an example, we have learned that there are shortages of engineers. Then let us train engineers to be able to resolve this crisis of load shedding. So those are some of the things that you need to do. Then, fourthly, the issue of coordination between within agencies or department or municipality. Each department in municipality, there needs to be greater coordination. I think the culture of silos is a problem. And let me tell you how we try to resolve it in Kaduna. And it has yielded great results. The cabinet, in South Africa, you call it the cabinet. In Kaduna State, we call it in Nigeria, we call it the Executive Council of the State. The council call it a cabinet. Yes, the cabinet will meet twice. It used to be every week, but we now set up 5 policy councils. Human Capital Development Council, Economic Development Council, Infrastructural Development Council, Institutional Development Council, and the Procurement Council. We meet, each council meets once a week. And what it does, there are people who are not members of the cabinet, but they are heading agencies per system. They participate in these councils. And these councils, the governor doesn't attend. It enables colleagues to self-monitor themselves and peer review the activities. So you say, okay, you report on this. Professor Omano reports on this. He's heading this agency. When you come to the next meeting, it is not the governor who is going to ask me. It is my colleague, Professor Lawanson, who will ask me, Omano, in terms of the agenda, in terms of the report of the last meeting, this is what you were assigned to undertake. How far have you gone with it? So I think that is one of the things that we need to do to enhance the capacity of the institutional capacity of municipality. And Professor Lawanson will attest to this. Since we started doing that, you can see the records, the development stride in Kaduna State. It's not because I sat there, but you can even go. You will see what I'm talking. You'll see what I'm talking about. So we need to begin to do that, both at the national level, state level, and municipal level. Then, lastly,
Mr. Edigheji, because we have 2 more questions remaining, and then I would give each panel, I think, 3 minutes to close off.
Yes. 1 second. I'll take 1 second. Let your recruitment, don't recruit on the basis of the ethnic or religious or racial coloration. Get the best from anywhere they are in the country. Let them serve the people of the municipality, of the council, or of the province. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Edigheji, for that insightful response. And you particularly mentioned one thing in relation to working in silos, of which is a culture that needs to end. In the South African context, we recently adopted the new district development model, of which also tends to or seeks to address that particular issue. Then there are two questions that we have here in the chat. One is from Professor Anthony Butler, and the question is, does it make sense to empower the wider province or region in which population and economic growth are occurring, or should the focus be on the city itself? And this is a particular question, again, that's also related to major debates in economic geography related to your space neutral, your spatial targeting, and as well as your place-based economic development. And I believe that in South Africa, we have previously or mostly utilize your space neutral approach, but I'll leave it to our key panelists to respond to that. And the other question is there a relationship between poor planning and the lack of electricity infrastructure owing to the rapid urbanization? What is the personal safety risk profile of public servants versus other sectors when lucrative contracts require approvals only at the local level? And if there would be different outcomes if the approvals were centralized in terms of minimizing the risks. So I will give each panelist 3 minutes to basically respond to these questions. And after that, you may as well give us 2 takeaways before we close off the session. I think I will start with Professor Lawson.
Hi, thank you. From the work we've done in Lagos, and as it is in many other cities, energy is directly related to many other basic services, and it also holds the key to economic emancipation across the country, but especially for those in low-paying jobs, such as the hairdressers, the greengrocers, and things like that. And so in Lagos also, there's a direct correlation between access to electricity and access to water, whereby if there is no light, people are unable to pump and unable to access water. So we see energy as an overarching infrastructure that needs to be put in place to ensure that people are able to access their livelihood and other survival means. And so it's important that it must be prioritized in the delivery of public services for local communities. It goes back to the issue of data. We need to understand what people are using electricity for, and now that it becomes increasingly expensive, the demand becomes higher, we need to be able to understand that and also start to explore renewable sources such as solar, such as wind energy, particularly in the light of the climate crisis. And technology and innovation must respond to these issues. What are the fundamental issues that must be addressed in an urban setting? And then get the knowledge institutions, get the laboratories, get the SMEs, and get the private sector involved in finding solutions that are affordable and that are fit for purpose. And finally, I must thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts. South Africa is not very different from Nigeria, particularly because it is people that are there. It is people in the local communities, and it is to them that we must develop these plans and processes. And I think the bottom line with regards to governance is a commitment to do better, and that goes across the board. We have said a lot regarding partnerships, regarding co-production, regarding leadership recruitment and all of that. But the fundamental thing that must be done is a commitment to do better. If those who can make the decisions are committed to do better, then putting the things in place to ensure that some of these suggestions that have been given are put in place becomes much easier. So I dare say that the challenge is for us to get those who can make this decision to start the Africa we want to take the decisions to do better. Thank you very much. Back to you, Isaac.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawson. And I will go to our Professor Omano Edigheji.
Yes, thank you. Let me just take the one on is there a relationship between poor planning and lack of electricity and infrastructure in general? I think that question answers itself. and I'll start with Nigeria. About a decade ago, in the last decade, Nigeria has increased its population by millions of people. I'm sure it is more than 30 million people. But we plan for yesterday as if the population is not growing. Then the crisis of ESCOM also answered this question. We know this crisis has been there for the last 15 years, but instead of one servicing what is there, also building new generation and transmission capacity, we have not done that. That is the crisis. As my comments will say, the chicken has come home to roost. But that lies squarely also on the capacity of the state. That absence of a patriotic, foresight, visionary, committed political elite is part of the problem. The second related to that is where you don't have technocrat, and you give them the necessary incentive, you insulate them from daily political interference, it becomes problematic. So planning is key. Unfortunately, in both countries, in Nigeria, we say we have a National Planning Commission, which has now been merged with the Ministry of Finance. In South Africa, we have a planning commission, which is outsourced to private individuals. And when the Green Paper was released, I was critical because from my comparative studies, I did not see any country where you outsource your planning capacity. The Economic Planning Unit of Malaysia, which report directly to the Prime Minister. At the time we went there to do the interviews, there were 366 professionals, most of which have master degree and above. Our planning commission, the last time I went there, which here in South Africa, there were only 8 staff. Then you have these part-time commissioners. The question that I posed at the time, and I continue to pose, if my colleague, Attorney Butler, owns a mine and is a member of the Planning Commission, and there's a policy that will come from the Planning Commission that will adversely affect his mine, where will his loyalty lies? If he lies in his, in my view, in his mind. So we need a planning commission in the South Africa context that is resourced by full-time public servants, not part-time commissioners. And the Nigerian case, we need to go back and make the planning commission a separate entity, that is not merged with the Ministry of Finance. Thank you.
Edigheji, and I would also like to thank both panelists for taking your time and also sharing your insightful contribution to the Architecture of Government conference. And as a last point, I would also like to respond to the question that is also raised by Professor Anthony Bakla as to whether does it make sense to empower the wider province or a region in which population and economic growth tends to occur. Well, over the last 30 years, I believe that evidence shows that because of some of the policies that we have been using in terms of ensuring that we concentrate investment in certain key areas where there's economic growth and development, it shows that based on studies that have been done, that over the last 30 years, there has been a failure of the trickle-down effect, and that is why we are seeing an emerging trend of a rise in terms of regional inequalities. And we know that cities tend to do much better, and small town and rural municipalities, particularly in South Africa, have been on a decline, and particularly those that previously were industrial towns. And having stated that, thank you so much to the panelists, and I'd also like to thank the viewers that are joining us from everywhere in the world. And I would also like to inform you that we are going to take a break, and that we are coming back at 4. The next panel is focusing on fiscal decentralization and intergovernmental relations, and the panel is going to be focusing on these particular issues from 4 o'clock to 5:30. We will be chaired by Mr. Michael Sashes, with the participants including Kumba Dingowiso from Indonesia, Tebele Francisca from Brazil, and as well as Maria Antoneta Alva from Peru. Thank you so much for everyone for participating. Thank you.